right, good night. Good night, everyone, and welcome to this edition again of Wednesday Political Gaff. We are talking again, as we do every week, about the unfolding events after the no confidence motion. I think a lot of these shows came about after the no confidence motion, and that motion triggered a lot of activities, and we're still in the midst of that. My name is Salim Nausrudeen, and I'll be your host tonight. My guests tonight are no stranger to our audience and no stranger to these discussions. Miss Asha Kissoon, who is presidential candidate for the New Movement, and Bishop Edghill, who is a member and a candidate for the People's Progressive Party. We are expecting Mr. Ralph Ramkarran, who was the presidential candidate for Anug, New and United Guyana. The world, as you know, is going through a lot of pains and a lot of suffering, with the COVID lockdown and the COVID pandemic, and of course, it's creating economic havoc in many countries, and Guyana, of course, is no exception. We've had our own economic woes even before the pandemic and even before the no confidence. And it continues. The world is also looking at the ethnic and the racial inequalities in America, and they're looking at how their own country might be infected with racism. And every society certainly has its own dose of racism. Guyana, of course, has its own peculiar version of it, which spills over into the economics, the politics, and the social fabric of Guyana. And of course, we're in the midst of an election recount and figuring out, what's next. I myself was involved in one of the smaller parties, and I'm glad that the smaller parties did have a loud voice during the election. And after the election, and during the recount, and I'm sure the voice will continue to build and to grow and to be that middle voice that will speak for those Guyanese who are looking for the democratic, constitutional, the law-serving option. So with that, I just wanted to introduce my guests. I just wanted to get their opening thoughts on the recount, which just completed. So we're not going to talk about the nuts and bolts of the recount, but where are we today? There is, of course, a recount that was done, and then there are numbers that are public, that are known of each party. The one I was associated with got just under 2,000 votes, and so on. So that doesn't bring us much in terms of seats, but it certainly gives the Guyanese landscape an opportunity that 2,000 people voted for something that wasn't working well. But so I wanted to ask, and I'll start with Bishop Edghill. Tell me a bit about what's happening on the ground in terms of the post recount. Where are we? Where should we be?
Well, Salim, and good evening, and
good evening.
Asha, good night, and to all your viewers and listeners, good evening. As a country, we are at a very special time. We have had an election. The results of that election was known since March the 5th. People refused to accept the real result. We had a fraudulent declaration in District 4 that led to many different scenarios. We've had a recount. Every district from District 1 to 10 have been recounted and is now certified. Those 10 certificates are with the Chief Election Officer, who is to submit a report to the commission for deliberation, and then a declaration. What is happening in Guyana at this particular time? It would appear that while we in the PPPC went into these elections as a political contestant, it would appear that the APNU AFC went into these elections as a political combatant. We contested, but they're combating. There is an unwillingness to concede, an unwillingness to acknowledge you have lost. The numbers have indicated that by way of a fair and transparent recount, where every ballot was mounted on a screen that was huge enough, where 14 people or so sat in a room, looked at every ballot and ensured that the X was for a party that it was counted for, then totaled by way of a statement of recount. Those statements of recount passed through a process that was verified, went to the tabulation center, it was tabulated, spreadsheets were passed out to parties to recheck. At the end of the checking and verification, there was a signing and a certification. And this was done by all of the political contestants except the APNU AFC's refusal to sign from District 2. They signed District 1, but they didn't sign District 2 going onwards. The PPPC acknowledges that they are going to be the next government. President-elect Dr. Irfan Ali has been leading the charge in ensuring that we prepare a framework that when we get into office, how we will govern for all the people of Guyana. And I repeat that, how we will govern for all the people of Guyana. In our commitment that we made to the electorate, that one of the things that we will be working on is on a more inclusive form of governance, where we could get everybody involved, where we could get all hands on deck, where we could get everybody benefiting as a result of the policies and programs and projects that will be implemented by the new administration. So Dr. Irfan Ali, as our president-elect, is leading that charge. On the contrary,
I want to talk a bit about that too, because that has been a discussion by all commentators, about shared governance and all kind of configuration. But Asha, I want to get you in here. You participated, I think, daily in the recount. And when you were doing the recount, what was going through your head? Because they asked you to be part of that recount for what? And what were you doing the recount for, if not to select a winner?
Okay, just a clarification. I will not take credit for being there every day. I was not. I was working every day.
Your party was, definitely.
I would like to say first to my team, Dr. Josh Kanai, Carlisa Eiffel, and the rest of the counters, they were there every single day. So I give them all the credit. For the few days that I was there, as an experience as a new party, as a young person coming into politics, I must say this was not a very good welcome into politics, but we did learn a lot. We were happy that the recount was done. As you know, our party stood up and said we also wanted every region counted, ballot by ballot. And the results showed clearly, according to the numbers, that the PPPC was in the lead. And we have accepted that according to the recount, they are in the lead. We are waiting currently for GECOM to make that declaration because that's the legal part of the process. Every day that my members were there and whenever I was able to be there, all that was going through our mind was that when would this end? Because there were things that were coming up all the time. You had the APNU agents refusing to sign the final declarations. You had the issue of dead voters being brought up, people being told that they've migrated and voting, and all of these things coming up over and over. And all that was going through my mind personally was when would this come to an end, and when would our people be able to move forward? But now that the recount has finished, we're more concerned about peace in the population. because tensions are very high right now.
Were you surprised that after the recount that it was going to be another layer of legal or otherwise, rather than going straight to the point of saying, hey, we've done a recount, we believe this is the winner, or even if there isn't a declaration, at least one of the party who believe they're not winning could have conceded in the interim. I know some smaller parties have congratulated Irfan and so on already. Yeah.
I know. The truth is, I'm not surprised that more obstacles came up. In a way of speaking, I expected it because it was a vicious cycle since the no confidence motion. However, I was disappointed that we could not just move forward to a declaration and getting a government in place, a budget passed, help for people in the middle of coronavirus. Yes, I was disappointed, not surprised.
Yeah. And Edghill, I want to bring you back on the discussion here. When the recount started, there was just, we're going to count all the 10 regions, we're going to count every ballot, we're gonna make sure that it is certified and verified and all that stuff, and then we'll know clearly who has won the election. But suddenly, after the election, I'm hearing this talk also from the president, David Granger, and many APNU, and I'm sorry, no APNU members are here to defend their position, but suddenly I'm hearing about a 4-step process. That there is a recount, which is the first part of the process. Everything has a process, but sometimes the beginning of the process determines the end of it too. But suddenly I'm hearing recount is part of the process. Then you have CARICOM. Then you have the CEO. I'm not too sure what's the depth of this process. Can you explain to me what are these 4 processes, and if it is is it even relevant to what's happening in Guyana right now?
Salim, the first thing I would say to you, any 4-stage process is a concoction of David Granger to continue to mislead and misinform his supporters about the possibility of a win, even though the numbers are against them. The Constitution, the Representation of the People's Act, the statutes that govern elections in Guyana are very clear. The chief elections officer, job after the declarations of all of the regions or the districts is to take those 10 declarations, check them, verify them, add them, and prepare a report to go to the commission, for the commission to look at it, to verify that these numbers are accurate and correct, and to make a declaration. Now, during the recount process, I happen to be one of the counting agents for the PPPC, and I counted day 1, region 4, until the last day when region 4 completed. So I counted all of the 34 days that were available to count, except the days on Sundays when I missed for the purposes of worship and church and other responsibilities. And I went there for half of the day, but I was there literally every single day. Region 4, where the problem was, Mr. Mingo made a declaration that gave the AP and UAFC a number that our statements of poll showed was incorrect and fraudulent. We said, we requested a recount. Don't let us run away from that. The PPPC and all of the other smaller parties requested a recount. Mr. Mingo, who declared those fraudulent results, refused all of those parties a recount. Retired Justice Claudette Singh agreed to have a recount. President Granger and Mr. Barjadio agreed for a recount based upon the intervention of CARICOM. We went to that recount. That recount was supposed to be remember, the ballots were counted. A recount is just to check to see what is in the box. that what was counted was accurate. All 2,339 boxes were counted. The statements of recount reflect that what was on the statements of poll were practically accurate, except for instances when a ballot that was rejected became valid, or a ballot that was considered valid when you check it through, it was really a rejected vote, marked for more than one party, or did not have the official mark of something. Very small, minor changes in the figures, 1 or 2, when you look at the box. And there are some boxes, everything was just straight and went plain. And I'm talking here region 4. We now have the final numbers. What is the semantics and the explanations that are being offered that you have to have a four-stage process?
Yeah.
One Caribbean diplomat recently described President Granger as a sanctimonious gangster. Well, I would want to say tonight on your program, to continue to fool, deceive, mislead, and misinform the Guyanese people, it would be sanctimonious gangsterism, because the bottom line is the Constitution says the party with the largest number of votes, that presidential candidate, is deemed to be the person elected to be president. So from all intents and purposes, Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali, based upon the certification that was signed off at the end of the recount, is deemed to be the president-elect of Guyana, only waiting for an official declaration from the Elections Commission and to take his oath of office. All of this thing about discussing and bringing in extraneous matters and trying to create a scenario as if the count is one thing, but then you have to have this, and then you have to have that, and then you have to have this, and somewhere along the line, the fact that the PPPC has the largest number of votes in these elections will change. It's a stubborn way of continuing to mislead your people, and then it is giving fodder to the lunatic fringe elements, because you have the lunatic fringe elements who sit daily on social media, continue to tell people the APNU AFC have won the elections and it has been rigged to be taken away from them. The only rigging that took place in these elections was when Clement Mingo, whether by himself or with the help or aided and abetted by others, declared fictitious numbers for boxes in Region 4, which was clearly made plain to the whole world, because those numbers that he declared were never in the boxes, and the statements of recount show that.
Yeah.
A variance of some 22,000, and that's not a small amount, 22,000. David Granger and the APNU AFC was prepared to be sworn in as president with those fraudulent numbers. And now that the recount has shown that Muhammad Irfan Ali has won the elections and is to be deemed the president, they're trying to hoodwink and create anxiety in the population by saying somewhere along the line, somewhere maybe the chief elections officer or the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission or something is going to happen and overturn that recount numbers, which clearly show that the PPPC has won these elections in excess of 15,000 votes.
Yeah.
So where we are now is a propaganda mechanism that have stepped into the society that is being fueled by what I call the lunatic fringe elements.
Yeah. So Asha, I want to bring you in here too. Are you surprised that they're talking about four-stage process now, when for the last 18 months or so, Guyana was being managed by a government that's a caretaker government, in some instances was stepping out of the Constitution. The no confidence motion itself placed the entire Guyana in constitutional crisis. So is there a sense of hypocrisy that's being practiced here, that, hey, we got to stick with this four-stage process, but the Constitution we'll put aside for a while until we can figure out this 4-stage process. What are your thoughts on that? And are you surprised at all about this concept of 4-stage process?
Well, in all honesty, after the no confidence motion was bypassed, nothing surprises me. I expected anything after that. I would just like to state for the record that I do not agree with calling Mr. David Granger a sanctimonious gangster and that statement that was made. We're all adults, regardless of what is done. We need to go forward in a respectful manner because whether we like it or not, there's a part of the Guyanese population that do follow them and support them. And the leaders of this country, as Mr. Irfan said today in an interview, he will be a president for everybody, including those supporters of the APNU. And the only way to go forward is in respect. So at no point in time will I support that. As to this 4-step process, it's quite ridiculous, honestly. We understand that there's a process, but so much delay in the process is just putting our nation back every day. There's lots to be done. There are things to be put in place. The people need help. Right now, people are jobless. We're suffering with the coronavirus, even though, thank God, the cases are going down. But I'm still very concerned about the mining areas, especially close to the Brazilian border, seeing how high their incidences are. But there are a lot of things that need to be done right now. And it's holding up the entire process. It's giving their supporters false hope. And by giving false hope, it's a very dangerous thing. Because when a party declares winning, like what we had in the past, look at the riots that came about, look at the violence. And we're trying our best right now to call for peace, to call for unity. Let us accept the results going forward and let us put aside all thoughts of violence.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's definitely a call that we'll be elaborating on. But I want to get back to you. You were part of the election process and of course the recounting. There's been some charges levied against the PPP. That PPP itself was involved in fraud, election-related fraud, whether at the ballot level or whether it's buying out people. And even the APNU guys were saying that some of their people might have been bought out by the PPP. Have you, as an observer of this post-election process, saw any sign or any evidence of any of this from the PPP, as claimed by President Granger, who said that it was intentionally manipulated by the PPP? So, what are your thoughts on that? Is there any credence to some of those accusations?
First of all, I'd like to state how disgusting it was that APNU prominent members threw their counting agents and members under the bus like that. There people were out there working. My observations on election day was that the process went well. It was free and fair. I saw nothing that gave me any doubts that there was fraud taking place. The problems came about after Mr. Claremont Mingo fainted and the false declaration started pouring out. That was the fountain, or that's where everything started falling to pieces. As an observation and as a third party and an outside person looking in, I personally need to see evidence of fraud before I can say that it occurred. I saw claims were being made that people migrated and voted. Yet many people came forward to say that I'm right here in Guyana and my name is on that list, including some people that I know. I heard the claims that the PPP were in 2054, where people were having faces put onto them and they could change their appearance and there was this large screen. And I asked myself again, where is the evidence and what is the possibility of that happening? I know claims are always being made of electoral fraud, but in comparison to where we can see what Mr. Mingo did, the numbers are there, they speak for themselves, there's evidence. I need evidence to see what the PPP has done also, if at all there was fraud. But until I see that evidence, I will not say that there is any fraud going on.
Good. We want to welcome Mr. Ramkarran, the presidential candidate of New and United Guyana. Welcome, Ralph, and I think you're coming at the right time when we're going to switch our discussion from what's happening on the ground to what needs to happen at the legal side of things. But
Salim, I think before we take Ralph, since you raised the issue.
Yes, in fact, I want to bring it up.
The issue of fraud by the PPP, I think I should be allowed the opportunity to speak to that because it's a serious matter. Let me say clearly, from the first day when APNU agents started to object to serial numbers of persons who voted who were out of the jurisdiction or who were dead, as an agent of the PPPC that represented the PPPC, I asked specific questions to the supervisors who were conducting this recount. Could you tell us at page 1 of the poll book how many persons were present? At page 1 of the poll book, it states all of the persons who were present for the opening of poll and who worked. Page 8 of the poll book tells you all who worked all day and who witnessed and the closing of the book. So in every poll book, you had 5, 8, 9 persons, which would have included GECOM staff plus party agents and police officers who were present at every polling station. And this is the point I want to make. If the APNU AFC is saying that the PPPC committed fraud, you know what they're accusing? They are accusing all of GECOM staff. They're accusing their own party agent who worked on election day of colluding with GECOM and the PPPC to allow people who ought not to have voted to vote. And there was no such occurrence whatsoever. It is a concoction. It is a misrepresentation of the fact, because in every polling station, the presiding officer had what is called a folio with a color photograph and all the details of every person who show up to vote. So even if you show up to vote and you pretend to be someone who you're not, your color photograph, all your details and everything is there to either identify you or to say you're not such a person. All the agents had copies of that folio to examine every person, not just name and ID number, photograph. Yeah. This red herring that is being thrown out about the PPPC committing fraud, it is one that I will describe it this way. The party who is guilty of fraud and benefiting from fraud because they were prepared to be sworn in on the fraudulent declarations of claimant Mingo in District 4. Granger and all of the APNU AFC were prepared to accept a win with those fictitious numbers. But when they went to the ballot box and they discovered they couldn't change the numbers, they manufactured. So all of these things about dead people voting, the issues about people who were overseas and voted, this is what you call a manufactured controversy to put a smoke screen on the reality of what took place. The fraud took place at District 4 when claimant Mingo made a fraudulent declaration. The recount has corrected that and has proven that he inflated numbers by 19,000 or more for the APNU AFC and removed some 3,000 plus from the PPPC's votes. And that is the reality.
Let's get Mr. Ralph Ramkarran into the discussion. We are talking about the accusation that the PPP committed widespread fraud. In fact, President Granger said in an interview, I think might have been early today or yesterday, that it was intentionally manipulated. The election was intentionally manipulated. That's why we have these numbers and all these quote-unquote cases. I know your party was deeply involved in the recounting and other aspects of the election. What has your party found as it relates to fraud by anyone, including the PPP?
Well, there has been no evidence of fraud. I think that the small parties have played a tremendous role. Ours, including Kissoon's party, the new movement, have played a tremendous role in the recount. And no fraud has been discovered. As a matter of fact, all the allegations which have been made have not been supported by any evidence. So 4,000 votes have been rejected. That's a normal, reasonable number in elections of this size. 4,000 votes have been rejected because they did not comply with the provisions of the Representation of the People Act. You know, very interesting. In 19, the people you have there definitely Asha Kissoon and certainly the bishop are too young to remember. But in the 1997 case, which was her decision was given in 2001 of Esther Pereira, which was presided over by the current chairperson. As part of that process, the Hermanson process, there was audit of the votes. That audit was carried out by Justice Cross of of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Justice Cross found that a large number, I can't remember, somehow the number 40 sticks in my head. I don't remember if it's, I think it's 40,000 votes were not stamped. I don't know if people remember that. And they ruled, the commission ruled, the audit ruled that those votes were valid. And I think at some time in the future we have to consider the question as to whether these ballots should be stamped or not, because they already have a watermark to prove their validity, and maybe the stamping can be done at the time when they're being printed, because due to mistakes, a lot of these unstamped ballots, a lot of the ballots are not stamped due to errors of the presiding officer and the other officials. So anyway, no fraud has been proved, and that's the bottom line.
And so the other discussion I want to bring up too is what's causing all this confusion. And you've been in this for quite a long time. You've seen many variation of GECOM, many variation of PNC and PNCR and PPP and PPP Civic and so on. Is GECOM not taking full handle of the situation? Should they be in charge, or should the political parties and the courts and everyone else should be, deciding what's the next move? Because I feel GECOM is the one that's mandated to organize, plan, execute, and declare an election. However, they seem to have their ears open to everyone and at the whims and fancies. So how do we place GECOM in this whole unfolding mess that we have in Guyana?
Well, GECOM is a party that is now responsible and has always been responsible for the elections. And the process now is GECOM's under the Representation of the People Act and the order which, the recount order which GECOM has promulgated. GECOM, under both pieces of legislation, well, the order is not, might be considered subsidiary legislation, but the CEO is now to make a report, and GECOM is to make a declaration. GECOM is in charge, not the political parties, and that is what we have to wait for. And I don't see any.
But how can GECOM be in charge when GECOM is allowing, for example, like what the bishop has mentioned, that the only fraud that committed was when Mingo start reading his own declaration. How could that not be an issue that GECOM should be called in for?
Well, there is there is a recount process which is ongoing. It means that automatically the count by Mingo, the declaration by Mingo, followed by a declaration by the CEO of the whole elections, are stayed, so to speak. There's no specific decision, but they're stayed. And this happens in a normal recount. When an authorized person, when the votes are counted, and an authorized person goes to the returning officer, like an agent or election agent or somebody, candidate or somebody like that, as provided for, goes to the returning officer and says, I want, before 12 o'clock the next day, and says, I want a recount. The returning officer does a recount. He doesn't make any decision in relation to the count that is already announced. He doesn't say that that count no longer stands or anything like that. All he does is do the recount. And it's the same thing that the commission has done. They haven't made any pronouncement on the declaration that has been made. But obviously it means that that declaration is stayed until it is superseded by the recount declaration.
And Dr. Asha Kissoon, I want to get back to you on this. Do you see any issue as it relates to the election and how it is unfolded since March 2nd with how GECOM has handled it? Has GECOM been responsible? Has it maintained its independence and true to its mandate?
Well, I'm not going to disagree with my partner, Ralph Ramkarran, over there. He's a legal mind. However, I would like to say that even before March 2nd, we have been maintaining that GECOM needs to be depoliticized. We believe that the interest of everybody has not been served by them. They have 5 years to prepare for an election, and still there are discrepancies. At times, it seems very biased. We know we've had situations with the chairman not acting in everybody's interest. So clearly going forward, there needs to be some reform where GECOM is concerned. I must say though, during the recount process, the GECOM staff were very cooperative and they worked well. We don't have any complaints in regard to that. But on the way forward, for future reference, a lot of changes do need to be done there.
And does the PPP recognize some weaknesses in GECOM? Of course, GECOM was around for 23 years of PPP's administration. At this juncture, do you see some weaknesses that you believe your administration, if it does declare as the winner, will be addressing as it relates to GECOM?
Our platform has always been that constitutional reform should be driven from the people. We have stated in our manifesto, which is our commitment to the people, that we will consult with the people. Obviously, one of the things that will come up with during those consultations, like Asha and Ralph has been saying, is what happens at GECOM. Mm-hmm. And that process of reforming GECOM must be a process that not some technical mind decides that he could put a system in place, but it must be a process that is driven based upon a body of views that are coming from the people, that are distilled and crystallized and then formulated in a manner that could best serve the interests of all the people of Guyana. So having said that, the PPPC is committed to constitutional reform driven by way of consulting with the people. GECOM being one of those areas that I'm sure will fit in to that whole process of constitutional reform. But we have had this dissatisfaction. We have seen that staff of GECOM has gone rogue. Before the elections, we pointed out when GECOM, the commissioners met and made a decision of how many days claims and objections would last for, 25 days. We saw a publication of 49 days, contrary to the decision that was made. It was then amended, of course, to 42 days. But the decision of the commission was 28 days for claims and 7 days for objections certified. One instance of staff going rogue. We have seen while GECOM is, the commissioners are sitting and meeting, press statements emanating from the Secretariat that says things contrary to the discussion and the decision that is still yet to be made. We have brought that out to the public. So the real problem that we face in 2020 elections is the damage that was done to GECOM by the unconstitutional unilateral appointment of Justice James Patterson and the politicizing of specific staff and the hiring of some people who should have never been hired in the first place. And that is what is creating the problems in this election here. And we mustn't run away from it. And the person who contributed to that is President David Granger, who, when he bypassed all of the 18 submissions that were made by the leader of the opposition, decided that he wanted his man to be there to carry out his bidding. And that is what corrupted this whole cycle. Justice Claudette Singh got in as chairman and met a house-to-house registration process that was started based upon an order that was signed in the middle of night, dark of night, and kept hidden in some drawer by a man who was deemed to be unconstitutionally appointed by the Caribbean Court of Justice. This is the scenario that these elections were conducted in. We had politicization of particular people who went rogue because the intent was to ensure that the PNC-led APNU AFC remains in office. And at all means necessary, there were people who were prepared to carry out that. And like Asha said, during the recount process, we must agree that even some of those who played a role with political antennas out before, they were forced to act responsibly because of the transparent process and the observation that was being made by a body of people you couldn't really hide. So you had to walk the straight and the narrow line. And that is what Guyana needs. Guyana needs an elections commission that is guided from a policy level by people who are vested only for the purpose of ensuring that democracy prevails in Guyana, and staff who are vested only with that understanding that fairness, transparency, and credibility is what is required.
Absolutely. And, this all was triggered by the no confidence motion. Then we were supposed to have an election in 90 days. We didn't, so we went to court again. We went to 3 layers of court of the CCJ. Then it was a pain to get an election on the schedule. We had to go to court for that again. And then we have an election, and then our math went bad again, so we had to go to the courts to get everyone to start a recount process. Mr. Rob, from your experience, where are we going? Is this going back to the courts? Because I'm seeing one act court, another act court, election court. Are we going back to the courts?
Well, let me say a word about the Elections Commission first. I've served on 3 commissions for the 92 elections, 97 elections, and 2001 elections. And up to 2001, Elections Commission didn't decide anything. When there was a dispute, when there was a difference of opinion, the parties, and that means the major political parties, had to come to the commission with a resolution of the problem. The chairman said, look guys, you all decide. And I was in the 2001 commission. Robert Corbin, who subsequently became the leader of the PNC, had just come back from his studies, and they appointed him as a member of the commission. And I joined the 2001 commission. I resigned from Parliament. I was asked to resign from Parliament and serve on the commission, which I did. And I met Corbyn there. And that was what we had to do. Corbyn and I, we had to go to, when there was a dispute, Joe Singh was the chair. When there was a dispute, we had to go to our parties, resolve the dispute, and come back with a decision. Let me tell you this. On several occasions, I would say for myself that on many occasions, because I was on several commissions, but for Robert Corbyn, it would be only several, not many. We had to take decisions that we knew that our parties would object to. And I know as a fact that Corbyn did that. But the decisions which we took were reasonable and were necessary for the process of the work to go on. Now, that system has completely broken down. Completely broken down. There is no, starting from the time of Surge Bali, from about half the time since he was chair, gradually the commissioners began to disagree. I don't know what process they adopted, if they went to their parties and fought like I did. We had to go to our parties and convince them to follow the view that we had rather than the view that they wanted to take, because the view we had was the one that would keep the process going. Now, that system is completely broken down, time and all of that. So we need a new elections commission, a new structure, and I hope the commission can, the Constitution Reform Commission can determine that. We need a structure that will depoliticize the work of the commission.
So now to the question, are we going back to the courts?
Yeah, and now to the court. It looks as if we're going back to the court, because you can't have, the APNU cannot be making all of these major disputes, major allegations and accusations, and not challenge them in court. I mean, it would be a catastrophic political miscalculation for them not to go to court, or for them to, having made these allegations, to just drop them. You went through the list of things since the over a year ago, the no confidence motion. You know, Peter Wickham was, I was on a program with him a couple of days ago. He said in 2018, he's a pollster. In December, a political scientist who carries out polls which are reputable. He said in December 2018, Granger had a 2% lead. Now, it's not a big lead for elections. So had he observed the vote in the National Assembly, complied with it, and whole elections then, there's a good possibility that he could have done better than he did now. But they just wasted time with court cases and all of that.
Yeah.
But I see no, you know, PVP said in 2015 that elections were rigged too. The count was not, and they filed a petition. But the history of Guyana is, since free and fair elections returned in 1992, every losing party claims that the elections are rigged. Losing party, including the PPP. The PPP said in 2015 that the elections were rigged. Every party that has lost the elections. And we had a recount, we had an audit for the 1997 elections, which proved that it was not rigged. And we have an audit now, which has proved it was not rigged. So until our political system and structure is changed in Guyana, as we have been advocating, this is not going to stop.
So going back to the court thing, if we are going back to the courts, and I'm sure it's being led by APNU, on what grounds are we going back to the courts? And what are they taking to the courts that the courts will find credible enough to spend weeks to deliberate on?
Well, whether the court will find it credible or not, I don't know. The two major things are, one, they said that that people have voted, migrated people have voted. 8,000 discipline services votes ballots were not stamped. Those are the major accusations. And the most recent one is the East Coast boxes. Part of the boxes don't have any material in. Those are the claims they can.
Is the objective there for APNU to have more time in government and just delay the whole process, or is their objective to annul the election and plan for a new election?
The elections process will go on regardless of election petition. Now, there's a possibility which Mr. Nandalal has recognized and which they did in 2001. In the James Hamilton case, I think they did it in the case in which I was involved at the time. Before the president was sworn in, Jagdeo ran elections for the first time. Before he was sworn in, they brought an action to get an order to stop him from being sworn in on the ground that the elections were fraudulent and various other allegations. He postponed his swearing in, and the then Chief Justice Desiree Bernard heard the case day after day until it was finished. I think it took a week and a half or something like that to be finished. She dismissed the case, which was cited in some of these recent arguments. She dismissed the case and the president was sworn in. It is possible that that can happen now. Obviously, Mr. Nandalal is aware of what this potential is. And so he has written the court to ask for an opportunity to be heard in case an application is filed to delay the swearing.
Bishop, do you believe, based on what we've been discussing, myself and Mr. Ramkarran, that the APNU has a case in court?
Well, Salim, let me just first of all say I agree with my respected elder, Ralph, that losers have had a way of saying elections were rigged. In 2015, the PPP claimed that the election was rigged, but we graciously handed over power. And we went to court by way of an elections petition, which up until now has not been heard. So we were aggrieved. We were concerned about some things. We went to Surridge Valley as part of that delegation, and we asked for the recount of 22 boxes, which was denied. You know the narrow margin of victory that happened. But Donald Ramotar, as president, still conceded, handed over power, and we filed our elections petition. That is what people who believe in democracy do. The Granger administration has displayed to the world since the no confidence motion that they don't have a democratic culture. They don't believe in the principles and the tenets of democracy. They have used the courts as a way of postponing their departure from office. They did so for almost 16 months before an election. You have an election. Now they have used GECOM to delay their departure from office for 3 months. Now that we have a recount, they want to delay their departure from office. Again, listen to the issues. They told this nation that 8,000 or 81% of all the disciplinary services ballots were not stamped. So the soldiers and the policemen and the men of women of the joint services were disenfranchised. Ralph told us earlier the total rejected ballots are about 4,000. And those ballots are rejected for one, voting for more than one party, which was the largest group, people putting X to two symbols. People who didn't vote, people who took the ballot and put it in the box and they marked no X. Thirdly, people's votes were rejected because the voter could have been identified. People signed the name or put their initials. And fourthly, ballots were rejected because they didn't have the 6-digit stamp. The ballots that didn't have the 6-digit stamps didn't reach 400, but Harman is on record of trying to play and incite and agitate among the armed services that your votes have been stolen by the PPP because they compromised presiding officers not to stamp your ballots. Far from the truth. It's a total lie. So that cannot stand up in court. Secondly, if they're going to court to say that people who are dead voted, then the burden is for them to provide the evidence that dead people voted. And their agents who worked on election day attested to the persons who showed up, and that they're actually accusing GECOM, the presiding officer, the assistant presiding officer, the ballot clerk, the voter education people who were directing people who came to them where they have to go and all the rest of it, of collusion of a kind that did not exist. They're implicating more than 15,000 Guyanese in a conspiracy to allow dead and migrant people to vote. It did not happen. So it is good for the propaganda. That is why I've been saying the lunatic fringe element who've been fostering and fueling hate in the community to agitate and create some environment of insecurity are using these things. I don't believe there will be any court case. I don't believe there is any judge in Guyana that is worth their salt that will entertain this ludicrous proposition of coming to stop the declaration of the winner of an election when you've had this laborious, transparent recount that really showed what happened. The next thing is about the East Coast boxes, which the chairman have already determined that they must be counted. The evidence, video evidence, written testimony is there to show that those envelopes with the counterfoils and the poll books and everything were handed over to the compromise claimant Mingo at his office at High Street. And the APNU AFC, who was prepared to benefit from the fictitious declaration of claimant Mingo, is now saying that the PPPC conspired with presiding officers to disenfranchise people. You know, the one good thing is we did not count poll books, we counted ballots. And in all of those boxes, ballots were found. The boxes were sealed in the presence of district returning officers. Party seals were on those boxes. I participated as one of the guardians of democracy for almost 7 weeks, guarded those containers to ensure nobody was able to go in and tamper with them. And the containers were escorted to every counting station with police guard, with the representatives of the political parties, open in the presence of all of the agents, in the presence of the observers, both local and international, and the votes were counted. And what we just concluded was a recount of the ballots that were cast. So the propaganda that the APNU or the PNC-led APNU AFC is seeking to do to create mistrust or to destroy the credibility of the elections. They were prepared to accept those same ballots in those boxes based upon Mingo's declaration. They had no problem with that. Granger prepared 4 times to be sworn in on the votes in those same 29 boxes on the East Coast that were recorded on statements of poll that Mingo declared, even though he inflated and deflated some.
Yeah.
Now that the real number has come down, they're now trying to make big issues. All the poll books were handed in on election night to the DROs who took them to the ROs. They are in the custody of GECOM.
Yeah, I think you were going deep into the explanation of the process, which I think were followed by GECOM and on all the parties under keen observation, and it has led to a recount that is as accurate as the SOPs that is publicly known. But Dr. Asha Kissoon, I want to get you in on this. Do you believe that we're going to the courts again? Do you believe that there is a case for APTO to go to the courts? And what does this mean for Guyana in the near term? After you're done, we'll take a quick commercial break.
Okay, the fact is, if a political party has issues with the elections, by all rights, they can take it to court through an election petition. If they have the evidence to go forward, it's within their rights. I'm still waiting to see that evidence. Obviously, it's going to set back our nation, as I've been saying since the beginning, but I do agree that they have the right to do it through an election petition. I cannot disagree with that.
All right, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back, and we'll take this discussion to the next level in terms of how it's affecting the nation.
This is Richard David, a man championing the cause of the people, a leader who wants to take his district to the next level, fighting for affordable housing, fair property taxes, fighting for tenants, fighting for protection and healthcare for all, especially immigrant communities and undocumented workers.
I'm the opposite of Trump. I really am. I'm the candidate that came here without my papers. I am the American dream. My family came here and worked our butts off to rise up, and we're contributing to our society. We're taking care of our neighbors, and that's what immigrants have done forever in this country. That is the story of America.
Even before COVID-19, Richard has been there for his people. He is a man who has worked in government for 10 years and knows how government works. He is the man who will make a difference. He is a man who will fight for you.
We need to rise up. This is our time. If we don't make our voices heard now, we're going to continue to be ignored. Rise up, come out, vote. Please make this our moment. Vote for Richard David, District 31, and the elections on June 23rd.
You can count on Richard. Rise with Richard. Let's rise up together.
Globespan 24x7 is offering professional streaming services. Be at ease and let Globespan 24x7 handle all of your streaming services for talk shows, religious programs, funerals, and birthdays. Get professional streaming done with ease. Globespan 24x7 professional streaming services will give you the peace of mind that you deserve. Call 631-782-9272. That's 631-782-9272. Or email sales@globespan247.com.
Good evening again, and whether you're in Guyana or the USA or anywhere in the world, we want to welcome you back to Globespan 24/7. We've been having a very lively conversation on the recount, and it seems like our math is adding up finally, but our senses may not be. Since the no confidence motion, even before that, Guyana has been going through tremendous amount of pain, which is causing ruptures around the countries. Whether it's GECOM shutting down, and now you're looking at a higher level of even shutting down an entire company. That's in the news, and this is all directly related to either bad leadership, bad policy, or no leadership and no policy. You're looking at a Guyana government that's practically bankrupt, with an overdraft of over $80 billion. You're looking at foreign reserves at zero. You're looking at whatever oil money we would have had is locked up and keyed. So we have no access to that. So and this is all because either we have no leadership, or we've been having a train wreck of leaders over the past a few years. So I think it is urgent that we do get to the next level of getting a government in place. And with that, I wanted to bring in again my good friend Ralph here. Your co-founder of ANUG talked about power sharing, even talked about an 18 months interim government to plan another election and to look at some key areas of the Constitution. Is that is that a responsible statement to make during an election period when there is clearly, a winner and there is, clearly a process that was followed, but then your co-leader or your co-founder of ANUG talked about power sharing in this 18 months and looking at a new election and all that kind of stuff. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, I don't have to respond to it. If you want to ask questions about Henry Jeffrey, you call him up on the program and ask him. I'm sure he'll be very happy to appear and.
Well, he is from your platform, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
He's not a member. He's not a member of the executive of ANUG. But look, we have a policy of a big tent. You can once you agree with our core values: democracy, anti-racism, strong environmental support, and shared governance. You can have any views you want. But Henry's position is all in aid of shared governance, which is our fundamental policy. Unfortunately, I don't think there is legal support for the latest proposal that he has made, which is that the chairperson of the Elections Commission should call in the potential candidates of the two parties and ask them to serve for 18 months in a united government and to have elections again, and if not to serve, if they don't agree to call the chancellor. Now the chairman doesn't have all the power. The chairman has is to make a declaration. The chairman of the Elections Commission can't do anything other than make a declaration of the result. So that Henry's proposal is not going to go anywhere. I noticed today that he didn't write about that. He writes a weekly column in the Stabrook News on Wednesdays. I noticed today that he did not write about that. So I think he understands that that's
Bishop. I know there's a lot of talk about shared governance and interim government. You've had commentators from all directions saying that. Why the upsurge in such language at this time when there clearly has been an election and it's time for Guyana to kind of resolve that election before even looking at anything further? I mean, why the upsurge?
Well, Salim, you would notice it's the first ever governing party in Guyana is talking about shared governance. The APNU-AFC went to government in 2015. During the period 2015 to 2020, they didn't see the need to even have political dialogue or political engagement. They operated as if they're the government and they are the ones who are anointed for the task of forever governing Guyana. The PPPC played its role in opposition, representing people. We believe that a system of governance that involves the leaders of all the people of Guyana will serve for the good of Guyana. The models that are being put forward about executive power sharing and all the rest of it don't sit with us, and we don't believe that that's the model to go. The constitutional reform process that my esteemed colleague, Mr. Ralph Ramkarran, played a leading role in brought about significant changes that vested a lot of power in the opposition. The opposition ended up having almost veto powers in some instances. To get certain constitutional bodies established, particularly the Constitutional Right Commissions, you have to have 2/3 majority in the National Assembly. To get a chancellor and a chief justice appointed, you have to be able to get agreement from the opposition. There were several things that were introduced. And I remember being the head of the Guyana Council of Churches at that time, when there was a paper that was produced by the then president, I think it was Byron Champion, called Building Trust, when this whole discussion about shared governance was being put. But when you get to this context, in this election cycle, this talk about shared governance that is coming from the types of the David Hines and the others, is to say, if Afro-Guyanese leaders are unable to govern as the government, they must have a seat at the table in a model that give Afro-Guyanese some amount of power. That is the bottom line of their theorizing. And it is based upon race and class. Because when you look at what they are seeking to do, is more so to preserve their own interests, because they were in government. And what was the problem of the APNU AFC administration? Afro-Guyanese complained that they were neglected because the elite group of those who governed took care of themselves and did not take care of the masses.
Your presidential candidate mentioned today in the media that he's interested in an inclusive sort of arrangement.
Yes, we committed that in our campaign. We went to the people and we told them that.
Can you describe what that inclusive arrangement would look like under a new PPP government?
There are some things that we have already established. For example, dealing with oil and gas. It must be, politics must not influence and govern. Divisive politics, I should say, should not influence and govern when it comes to us dealing with our international partners in oil and gas. We said oil and gas must be dealt the same way that we have historically dealt with Guyana sovereignty. We move away from any form of divisive politics and we agree on certain principles where it comes to Guyana sovereignty. The same way we deal with Guyana sovereignty, we must be able to deal with oil and gas. So there's great scope for the opposition, whoever's the opposition, to be involved in policy formulation, decision making as it relates to how we engage with the international partners in oil and gas. The governing of state boards, traditionally, the PPPC has involved opposition members on state. I chaired the Guyana Post Office Corporation from 2002 all the way to 2011. The General Secretary of the PNC, Mr. Oscar Clark, sat on that board with me. So the decision makings of that state entity, I'm just giving one, but that happened across the board. So
but that's nothing new. That has been the case ever since. What new do you believe Guyana is looking for? And if the PPP gets into power, you have quote unquote the Afro base of PNC sitting out on the cold, out of the seats of power. What is it that the PPP will be doing to ensure that that population is part of the decision making as well as in the sharing of resources?
Ralph said it a little earlier when he was referring to issues at the Elections Commission. There has to be political dialogue. The place where political dialogue takes place is at the parliamentary level. There needs to be a greater engagement, political dialogue. For example, if there is adequate political dialogue, like what we were attempting to do in the run-up to when we had the issues with Lindenwood electricity, they sat and they discussed what we're going to do, how percentages of the budget that will be put towards developing infrastructure and opening up opportunities in vulnerable villages and all the rest of it. Those were things that were coming as a result of political dialogue. It influenced budget allocations from the Appropriation Act. So these are things that you can do. Community level, how we operate at the RDCs. We can have greater participation of how we operate at the RDCs. We have the NDCs, local government levels. So the issue here is still an issue of trust. And I'm sorry that I have to say this, because in the 1994 period, we had an opportunity to experiment with how we share government and how we share responsibility. When we had the local government elections, and you had the configuration of the Georgetown City Council of no group having a clear majority, we said we will have a rotating mayorship. The PNC got the mayorship at first with Ranvel Jordan. Then the GGG got it with Hamilton Green. When it was time to go to Philomena Sahai, the whole arrangement was broken up. It never happened. Hamilton Green remained mayor from 1994, not 94, from when he took over from Ranvel Jordan, almost until the other day. A whole longest serving mayor. There must be an element of trust. You don't want to have a situation where there is no opposition, because part of governing in a democracy is ensure that you have strong opposition to hold the government's feet to the fire, to ensure responsible policy formulation, responsible decision making, responsible distribution of goods and services. But political dialogue is what produces that kind of accommodation for interventions.
And I believe what we're witnessing right now and what we're going through right now over the past year and current has caused the biggest casualty has been trust. If you know what I mean, trust between our people, our races, our parties, our institutions. Trust have gone down the drain, and I think that's definitely not where we want to be. So, Dr. Asha Kissoon, I know you have an interest in addressing Guyanese and so on about what's happening in terms of how we've taken mistrust of each other to an even higher level, where guys are on social media, promoting race hate, promoting political affiliation hate, and so on. So, and I think this is something that has to be arrested even before we get to oil and before we get to state boards and before we get to those things, because Guyana is going through a tremendous amount of pain, and the trust among its people is in deep jeopardy. So, Asha, your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the main reasons of mistrust that we have is fraud. On the way forward, let me say that if we have a majority government or a one winner, one party takes all system, Guyana will be the loser. And I repeat it, if one party alone is the winner, Guyana will be the loser. Meaning, we need to get rid of all the people responsible for fraud, exclude them completely from the system, and go forward with fresh new perspectives. I speak as a third party, or say as a tripartite joiner. My party is right here, Mr. Ralph Ramkarran. He has a lot of experience in it. He knows what has happened. And when he explained the importance of shared governance, we understood where he was coming from. But I'd like to bring it from the perspective of taking out the people that have been responsible for throwing Guyana into the gutters for this long and going forward with them. When we talk about what's happening on social media and the mistrust and the violence and the racism, it's something very real. I can use tonight as an example. In our own members' chat, we were speaking about racism. We face it head on. We talk about it all the time. And a member forwarded a message about racists in Guyana and the Afro-Guyanese and what was happening. I personally had no problem with somebody showing me what was being said and what is happening. Because in order for us to take hold of the situation, we first need to be aware of what is happening. I spoke to the member and spoke out about my own experiences with racism. What this gentleman went on to do was delete my messages and make a public post about it, saying that the presidential candidate of the new movement is racist. That's another example of the mistrust that we have going forward. Let me say this to everybody tonight. We are at the end of the day. We're still neighbors, we're friends, we're family, we're workers. And the elections is finished and all the fighting is put aside, we still need to take care of each other. Right now, as people have lost their jobs with the COVID-19, the Citizen Initiative has been hampered. My party members are doctors. We risk our lives taking care of these patients every day. And United Guyana has been doing their part. We are our brothers' keepers. And when they want to fight and bring in all this racism, who's going to take care of each other? No man is an island. And just as I said it for the political parties that they need to work together and come up to solutions in a peaceful manner, it's the same goes for the citizens of the country. They need to learn to work together and respect each other's political ideology. Be it the PPPC in government or the APNU be in the opposition or whatever the case is, there needs to be a middle ground where everyone can come together and put aside all this mistrust because trust needs to be built first of all. Take out the fraud and let's move forward.
Yeah. Mr. Ramkarran, I know you've been again in the circles for a long time, and you did mention that you have seniority among the panelists here tonight. Where are we going? I mean, race and ethnicity has been a friction point of Guyana and politics and power for the past, 50, 60 years. And I see an upsurge in racial discussion, and of course with the Black Lives Matter movement in the USA, some are even saying that, hey, Indians have been had their knees on Africans for quite a while in Guyana, and of course you have Indians saying things about Africans and so on. But with all the chit chat unnecessarily that's happening online, and there's going to be a spill at some point. Where are we heading with this kind of discussion? What can be done in the immediate? Because yes, I know your party represents global changes in Guyana, whether it's the constitutional changes and so on. Those things take years and months and years to get done. But there's a Guyana that needs to be preserved today, so that we can take care of GECOM and our overdraft and take care of our revenues, and we can take care of the COVID pandemic and so on. What is it that the ethnic leadership needs to understand and take into consideration and start putting in place?
I think what our leaders need to understand, they did at one time, but the situation has changed now, is that Guyana consists of two communities, two separate and independent communities. We're not friends with each other. We don't go to each other's weddings or social occasions. If we work in the same place at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, we go home. If we go and have a beer in the afternoons or weekends, or weddings, only our community is present. As a result of that, despite all the efforts at cultural integration and cultural cohesion and the efforts for social cohesion and all of that has happened over the years, Guyana remains a bitterly divided country. And it's bitterly divided not because people are wicked and bad. It's bitterly divided because we are two independent peoples with two different histories and two different cultures, except that we live under one roof. And the history that we have lived under is one that has basically caused suspicion. Because we have lived in a country of poverty all our lives, when the resources which are available are not enough for both communities, and therefore we're suspicious of what the other one has, or what the other one gets at various times when one holds power. Now, all this thing about inclusive governance, we did all of that. We did all of that from the year 2000. Made a better parliament, created all kind of commissions for people to work on. The bishop served on the Ethnic Relations Commission for a very long time, did a lot of work there. All these things, appointment of Chancellor and Chief Justice, can't get the Chancellor and Chief Justice appointed up to now. Appointment of Commissioner of Police to be agreed between both sides. All of these things we have done. The fear and the suspicion remains very high. And the reason it remains very high is that one group sees itself being oppressed and dominated by the other group, whether true or not. Whether true or not, it sees itself oppressed and dominated by the other group once that other group solely controls the levers of political power. And that is not going to change unless the levers of political power are shared. That's not going to change. The PPP during its term of office had to contend with violence, much of it violence against Indians, in the 92, 97, 2001 elections. They had to contend with the violence in the jailbreak from 2002. It lasted from 2002 to 2008. Much of it violence, criminal terrorist violence, much of it against Indians. It had to contend with an uprising in Linden, in which 3 African Guyanese were shot and killed. Many more were shot, but 3 were killed. So this is not going to stop. And the PPP has now a 1-seat majority. The PNC had a 1-seat majority. They ruled as if they held the whole parliament. Well, let us see what the PPP will do now, having a 1-seat majority. Now, we have all elements of inclusive governance in place. Not all, but many. We can have more. But inclusive governance is not going to work. First, the opposition is not going to cooperate.
Absolutely.
They're not going to cooperate. So when they don't cooperate, what do you do? So inclusive governance is not going to work. And let's try it.
Yeah,
I have some proposals to increase the possibility of inclusive governance. But let them try it. It will not work. And this debate is going to continue about shared governance, and more people are seeing the reality. Elections are never going to be any different than these elections.
Absolutely. So, Bishop, the ball seems to be in the PPP's court based on numbers that we're seeing and based on what's happening and what we're hearing and so on. It seems more than likely that the PPP will be leading the next government, whether it's next week or next month or next year. What is it that the PPP needs to do to reach out to the other 48% to say, hey, I'm governing for you, I'm governing for me, and I'm governing for everyone? Because Guyana cannot be governed for 50% of its people or 51% of its people. It has to be governed for everyone. What is it? And you need to put on your PPP, your strong PPP hat here. What is it that the PPP will be doing to ensure all Guyanese and also to quell any sort of issues in the near term, whether it's violence or increased racial tension over the next month or 2 months? What is it that the PPP needs to do, and what will it do, since most likely it will assume power?
Well, I'm glad that you asked, Salim. And I would like to start with what we have done. The General Secretary of the PPP made it public at one of his press conferences. Afro represent in the PPP. And he launched a special program of reaching out to Afro-Guyanese, embracing Afro-Guyanese community. And we are happy to report that one of the reasons why we would have these elections is because in We got 69,000 votes in Region 4. In 2020, we got 80,000 plus votes in Region 4. We are the party that have increased, the greatest increase in Region 4 came from the PPPC. And that is why we now have several councillors at Georgetown as compared to what we used to have before. We succeeded in the local government elections in increasing our leadership and participation in Georgetown. So I want to bring that there is an acknowledgement from the highest level of leadership in the PPP that we were underrepresented among Afro-Guyanese, and we have to do something to embrace it. Now, when you look at our list that we went to the elections with, you will see a large percentage of Afro-Guyanese from all regions, class, status, and religion being immigrants. It is from our list that the people will be appointed to parliament and positions. So you can expect seats. What else we need to do and what we would have done? We have never won Linden as a party. I led the PPPC's campaign in Linden in the 2020 elections. We didn't win. 2015, we didn't win Linden. 2011, we didn't win Linden. But even though we never won Linden, we built infrastructure in Linden to benefit the people of Linden. New hospitals, new schools, new roads, improvement in the water system, water treatment plants. We ensured that development came to Linden. Let's go to Sophia, a largely Afro-Guyanese PNC stronghold. I just sat and counted the ballot boxes from the 2020 elections when there were 318 votes to the APNU AFC. The PPPC got 12 and 15 and 20. And of course, that's an increase from the 2 and 3 that we used to get.
So Bishop, we're running out of time. So if you can take a 30 seconds just to do a wrap up, and I'll ask my other guests to do a wrap up.
I'm actually saying to you that the PPPC has and will continue to ensure that when it comes to the development of Guyana, everybody benefits. So whether it's in land distribution, whether it's in house lots, whether it's in educational opportunities, scholarships, whether it is in terms of access to financing for business, like we would have done before, we will continue to do that. But we also have to engage their political leaders. I recall being chairman of the Ethnic Relations Commission, and when we engaged the Afro-Guyanese community, you know what they said to the Ethnic Relations Commission? The PNC do not represent Afro-Guyanese. They take our votes and they get into office, but they do not represent us. Consult with the organizations that represent us. So we have to deal with the political leaders that gain their political strength from those votes, but we also have to engage the organizations that represent and are activists among Afro-Guyanese to ensure that everybody is included. Irfan Ali, as president, has committed to that policy and program that has been articulated by the PPP.
Dr. Asha Kissoon, you want to make a closing statement and any sort of appeal that you may have?
Yes, of course. For 50 plus years, we've seen both of these major political parties making promises to us. So as the bishop sits there and speaks on behalf of his party, it is my wish that they do fulfill the things that they say they're going to do. I make a final plea to the population to stay away from all violence, all racist speech, and everything that instigates division at this point. Let us come together as a people and move forward together.
Ramkarran?
Well, I'd like to endorse what Asha says very strongly, but I'd also like to let the bishop know that there will be no free pass for the PPP.
I agree.
The people of Guyana, by a very slim majority, has given the PPP the right to hold office. But but that Guyana consists of two separate and distinct communities. And there are many of us who will be looking to see whether those distinct communities are both engaged, fully engaged, and whether the PPP discharges the mandate of the nation to bring unity and economic development and democracy to the people of Guyana.
And with that, I just wanted to remind everyone that Globespan has a series of shows every Monday and Wednesday. You can tune in at 7:30 to get live engagement with Guyanese leaders and Guyanese in the diaspora who have a deep interest in the success of Guyana. Over the last year, and especially over the last few months, Guyana has been going through tremendous amount of pain. The pandemic, the lockdown, the slowdown, the lockdown of the economy itself, the inability for the government to provide a stimulus package to individuals and businesses, and now we talk about overdraft. We are now hearing about GECOM has no money. The government has no money for GECOM. We're looking at reserves being dried up. So the picture is not great, and it will require a government and a leader that understands economy, that understands people, that understands development and strategy to move Guyana forward. Guyana cannot be managed by politics. Guyana must be managed by strong economics. And we're hoping that the new government, or whichever government comes into power, focuses on the development needs of Guyana. That's the only way we can end poverty, the only way we can reduce the level of poison in our racial engagement, and it's the only way we can reach the next level of what we promise our children. With that, I want to say good night to all my guests, the bishop, the former speaker, and the doctor. A very good night to you, and thank you very much for the engagement, which was very healthy and very relevant to Guyana today. We wish Guyana, all parties, the best in the coming months and the coming years, and wish the new government that they listen carefully to all parties, all sectors of society, especially the smaller parties who have a strong relationship with issues, so that it can help to carve some of their strategy and their policies moving forward. With that, again, good night and stay tuned. And special thanks to my good friend Devin and Nohar Singh for bringing these shows and making it possible for all of us. Thank you. Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.